There is a shoebox on the top shelf of my closet. It has been there for 11 years. I know exactly what's in it. Old photographs, mostly. A few birthday cards I kept for reasons I can't always remember. A watch that belonged to my father. And underneath all of that, at the very bottom, where I put it deliberately, where I have to move everything else aside to reach it, there is a letter. Still sealed. Still unopened. My name is Margaret. Margaret Ellison. Maggie to most people who knew me before I turned 40 and decided I was done with nicknames. I'm 74 years old, and I have been carrying this letter for 11 years, and I have never been able to explain, not to my daughter, not to my sister, not even to myself in any way that fully satisfies, why I haven't opened it. I'm going to try to explain it now. I don't know if I can, but I think I need to try. The letter is from my brother Daniel. He wrote it in 2013, about 3 months before he died. He mailed it to me, put a stamp on it, addressed it in his handwriting, which was always slightly too large for the lines, always a little urgent looking, like his hand was trying to keep up with his mind. He mailed it to me, and I received it on a Tuesday in November, and I held it in my hands, and I looked at it for a long time, and I put it in the shoebox, and I have not touched it since. Daniel was 58 when he died. Pancreatic cancer. Fast at the end, though the months before were not fast. He had time. We had time. I drove to see him twice. He was in Portland. I'm in Sacramento. It's not far, not really, not when you think about the alternative. And both times I sat with him and we talked, and it was good, mostly, as good as those things can be. But there was something we didn't talk about, something that had been sitting between us for most of our adult lives, the way things sit between siblings who love each other but have never quite been able to say a particular thing out loud. I think the letter was him finally saying it, and I think that's why I haven't opened it. Daniel and I were close as children, very close, 2 years apart. He was older, and we were the kind of siblings who had a world between us that nobody else was fully admitted to, codes and jokes, and a shared understanding of our family that we never had to explain to each other because we'd both been there, both seen the same things, both learned to navigate the same particular silences that our house was full of. Our father was a difficult man. I'm not going to go deeply into that. He's been gone a long time, and I've made a kind of peace with it, the imperfect peace that's available to people who grew up in complicated houses. But he was difficult, and Daniel and I were each other's company in that difficulty, each other's proof that we weren't imagining it. That bond, the bond of 2 children in a hard house, it's a specific kind of closeness. It doesn't always survive the people those children become. We grew up and grew apart in the way that siblings sometimes do when they leave the shared geography of childhood and build separate lives. Daniel went north. I went south. He married a woman named Patricia. They divorced after 9 years, and then he lived alone for most of his adult life. By choice, he always said. He liked his own company. He liked the quiet. I married Thomas in 1979. We have one daughter, Claire. Thomas died of a stroke in 2009, 4 years before Daniel, and that grief, Thomas's death, changed the geography of everything. But even before Thomas died, even during the years when my life was full and functioning and moving forward, Daniel and I had become, distant is the wrong word. We stayed in contact. We called on birthdays and holidays. We emailed occasionally. But there was a thing between us, an old thing,
a thing that started, as best I can trace it, in 1987, and that neither of us ever addressed directly in all the years that followed 1987. I was 37. Daniel was 39. Our mother was ill, not dying, not yet, that came later, but ill enough that decisions were being made about her care. Daniel and I were the only children, and there was a disagreement. Not a screaming fight. That wasn't how we were. It was quieter than that, and in some ways worse for being quiet. Daniel thought our mother should come and live with him in Portland. I thought she needed professional care, a facility that could manage her needs in a way that a single person living alone could not. I was right in practical terms. I knew I was right, and I held on to being right the way you hold on to something when you feel the ground shifting under you. Daniel felt that I was choosing convenience over family. He didn't say it in those words. He was careful, always careful with me in a way he wasn't with other people, but that was the shape of what he felt, and I knew it, and I never let him say it, and I never said what I actually felt, which was that I was terrified and didn't want to admit it. My mother went into a care facility in Sacramento. It was the right decision, and it cost me something with Daniel that I never fully recovered. We moved forward, the way families do, the way you move forward when the alternative is to stop and actually look at the thing, and the thing is too uncomfortable to look at directly. We moved forward, and the years passed, and our mother declined and died in 1994, and Daniel and I stood at her grave and held each other, and neither of us said anything about 1987. And I thought, maybe it's done now. Maybe that's behind us. I think I believed that. I think Daniel did not. After our mother died, Daniel and I found a kind of steadiness, not closeness, not the closeness we'd had as children, not the world between us, but steadiness, regular contact, a functional warmth, the kind of relationship that looks fine from the outside and feels from the inside like a piece of music with one note that's slightly off, not enough to ruin it, just enough that you notice. I noticed. I think we both noticed. But there was an agreement between us, unspoken, never negotiated, just somehow mutually arrived at, that we would not go back to 1987, that we would be okay and move forward and let the old things sit. We kept that agreement for 26 years. Thomas died in 2009. I've said that already, but I want to say something more about it, because his death changed things with Daniel in a way I didn't expect. Daniel drove down the day after Thomas died, showed up at my door with almost no notice. He sat with me for 4 days. He didn't try to fix anything or say the right thing. He just stayed. He made coffee in the mornings, and he sat with me when I didn't want to talk, and he talked when I did. And he cried with me once, the second night, when I showed him a photograph from our wedding. He was more present in those 4 days than he had been, really, honestly present, than in many years of regular contact. And I wanted to say something about 1987. I felt it rising. Some part of me recognized that he was there, fully there, and maybe the door was open. But grief is consuming, and it was easier to receive what he was giving without complicating it. I didn't say anything. He drove back to Portland on the 5th day. I watched his car from the window until I couldn't see it anymore. His cancer diagnosis came in early 2013. He called me on a Sunday morning and told me directly, without preamble, which was very Daniel. He said the doctors had given him somewhere between 6 months and a year, and that he was not interested in heroic measures, and that he wanted me to know. I don't remember exactly what I said. I know I cried. I know we were on the phone for a long time. And I know that at the end of the call, before we hung up, there was a silence between us that felt different from other silences, heavier, like we were both standing on opposite sides of a door neither of us was opening. He said, "I'll talk to you soon, Maggie." He called me Maggie. He was the only one I still let call me that. I visited him in April. He was thinner than I had expected, but more himself than I had feared, still sharp, still dry in his humor, still reading 3 books at once on the table beside his bed. We talked about our childhood, good memories mostly. The winter we got snowed in for a week, and our father was unexpectedly, inexplicably easy that whole week, relaxed in a way he almost never was. How Daniel and I whispered about it afterwards, trying to understand it. We talked about our mother, about what she'd been like when she was young.
Before the illness, before the hardness settled in, we both had different memories of her, and I liked putting them together. We did not talk about 1987. I drove home on a Thursday. I held it together until I reached the California border, and then I pulled over at a rest stop and sat in my car and cried for a long time. I visited again in September. He was weaker, the sharpness still there, but the body working against him now in ways you could see. We watched old films on his television, ate soup that his neighbor had brought, sat in a silence that was comfortable and uncomfortable at the same time. On the last evening, I was leaving the next morning, he looked at me and said, "I'm glad you came, Maggie." I said, "I'm glad I came too." And then nothing. The moment where something else might have been said passed like all the other moments. We watched the end of the film. I helped him to bed. I said good night. I drove to my motel 2 streets away. I lay in the dark and I thought, go back. Get up and go back and knock on his door and say the thing neither of us has said. I didn't go back. I drove home the next morning. He died in December, a Tuesday. His neighbor called me. Peaceful, she said, in his sleep. I flew up for a small service. He didn't want much, had left specific instructions, very Daniel. And I stood in his apartment afterward and helped sort through things, and it was strange and quiet and final in the way that only death is final. And on the kitchen table, separate from his other papers, as if left deliberately, there was a list of names and addresses, people to be notified. My name was at the top. The letter arrived 11 days later. He must have mailed it weeks before he died, with a delayed intention or a careful plan. Daniel was always a planner. He would have thought about the timing. He would have wanted me to have it after, not before. I recognized his handwriting immediately. I stood at my mailbox in the cold for a long time. I brought it inside, set it on the kitchen table, made tea, came back, looked at it, put it in the shoebox. People have asked me, my daughter Claire has asked me, gently more than once, why I haven't opened it. I tell her I'm not ready. She doesn't push. She's a good daughter. But not ready is not an answer. It's a postponement dressed as an answer, and I've been dressed in it for 11 years. The truth, the real truth, the one I've been circling on quiet evenings when there's nothing to distract me, is that I'm afraid of 2 things. I'm afraid it says something I did wrong that I'll have to live with more clearly than I live with it now, and I'm afraid it doesn't. I'm afraid it's kind, forgiving, that he wrote it with all the love he always had for me and none of the weight of 1987. Because if it's kind, if it's just his voice being my brother, saying goodbye, then I will have to grieve him all over again, freshly, completely.
And I will also have to understand that the door was never as locked as I thought it was, that I could have walked through it any time. My daughter Claire is 38. She looks like Thomas around the eyes. Something in the way she listens, the stillness of her when she's paying attention, that is completely his. I notice it sometimes, and it stops me for a moment, that particular inheritance. She knows about the letter, not everything, not 1987, not the full shape of what Daniel and I never said, but she knows it exists, and she knows I haven't opened it. She said to me last Christmas, very quietly, while we were washing dishes together, "Mom, I think Uncle Daniel would want you to read it." I said, "I know." She didn't say anything else. She handed me a dish to dry. I think she understood that knowing and being able to are not always the same thing. I've thought about what Daniel might have written. I've done this more than I should, probably. Constructed possible versions of the letter in my mind. His voice, which I still hear clearly, a little low, slightly dry, the voice of someone who chose words carefully. In one version, he talks about our childhood, the good parts. The winter our father was unexpectedly easy, the codes we had between us. In another version, he talks about our mother, about what we each carried from that house, and whether we ever put it down. In one version, the one I return to most, the one that costs the most to sit with, he talks about 1987, not with anger. Daniel was never angry in that direct way, but with the quiet honesty of a man who knew he was running out of time and didn't want to leave things folded up and unread. I don't know which version is the real one. That is the point, I suppose. I won't know until I open it. There is a thing that happens when someone you love dies before a thing between you is resolved. The thing doesn't go away. I think people expect it to go away. I think there's a belief, I had it, I think, that death closes everything, that once a person is gone, the unfinished things lose their charge somehow. They don't. If anything, they become more present, more solid, because now there is no possibility of resolution through conversation, through a phone call, through a quiet evening and two people finally saying what needed saying. The only resolution available to me is the letter, and the letter is in the shoebox, and the shoebox is on the shelf. I'm going to tell you something I've told almost nobody. 6 months after Daniel died, I took the shoebox down. I sat at the kitchen table. I took the letter out from under everything else, and I held it. I held it for a long time, and I put my finger under the seal, and I stopped, and I put it back. I don't know what stopped me. Some resistance in me that I can't fully explain. Some part of myself that was not ready to know, not what he said specifically, but what his voice would do to me, how real he would make him again. Because when I read it, he'll be there, fully there, in a way he hasn't been since he died, and then he'll be gone again immediately, and I'll only get that once. I'm 74. I think about that shoebox differently than I did at 63 when Daniel died. I think about it with a different kind of urgency, not panic. I'm not panicking, just an awareness that time has a direction and it doesn't change direction, and there will come a moment, eventually, when I am not able to choose, and the letter will outlast me, unopened, and Claire will find it, and I won't be here to explain the shoebox, or 1987, or why her mother held the last thing her uncle wrote and couldn't bring herself to read it. That is not what I want. I want to read it. I think I've always wanted to read it. I think the not reading it has been its own kind of conversation with Daniel, a way of keeping him present, a way of having something still pending between us, which is a strange thing to want, but is also, I think, very human. As long as the letter is unread, he hasn't fully said his last thing. As long as the letter is unread, the conversation isn't over. I'm going to take the shoebox down today, after I finish recording this. I'm not telling you that because it's a resolution or a conclusion. I don't know what will happen when I sit down with it. I might open it. I might hold it again and put it back. I might finally read my brother's handwriting and hear his voice one last time. I don't know, but I'm going to take the box down. That much I know. His handwriting was always slightly larger for the lines, always a little urgent, like his hand was trying to keep up with his mind. I've missed that handwriting for 11 years. I think I'm ready to see it again. If there's something you've been keeping sealed, not necessarily a letter, it might not be a letter, but something you've been holding unopened, because reading it or saying it or finally looking at it means something becomes real that you've been managing from a distance. I'm not telling you to open it. I'm just sitting here saying I understand why it's still sealed, and that I also understand now, at 74, what it costs to keep it that way. If something in this stayed with you, leave a comment. You don't have to explain anything. Just, I'm here, whatever it is.